Chapter 1. Shadows of the Past. Walking back from college, Melissa Sylvester felt the familiar weight of her backpack. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the alleys in a sinister light. She craved nothing more than a hot shower, a bowl of ramen, and her favorite Netflix show. But tonight, the shadows felt heavier, more oppressive. As she walked, a nagging feeling crept up on her. "Is someone watching me?" she whispered to herself, feeling both nervous and strangely excited. Most of the creeps around were just junkies or college bullies, but she wasn't about to take any chances. She fingered the keychain attached to her bag, the one with a hidden Swiss knife. Her mother insisted she carry it, along with a licensed gun. After all, Melissa was part of the Sylvester Mafia, and she knew how to handle shady people. But she had left that life behind, claiming she wanted to pursue higher studies. Turning the corner to her apartment, a chill ran down her spine. She paused, scanning her surroundings. Someone was here. Her heart pounded in her chest. A figure emerged from the shadows. "Nice night for a walk, isn't it?" His voice was smooth, unsettling. Melissa tightened her grip on the keychain. "Who are you?" He smirked, stepping closer. "Is someone interested in your unique background?" Melissa's mind raced. "What do you want?" "Just a chat," replied, his eyes locking onto hers. "I've heard about your family. Quite impressive." Melissa forced a laugh. "If you're looking for trouble, you're barking up the wrong tree." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to offer you an opportunity." "Opportunity?" Melissa scoffed. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." He tilted his head, studying her. "Oh, but you will be. Your family's connections could be very lucrative for someone with your skills." Melissa's pulse quickened. "I'm done with that life. I'm studying to be a psychology professor." He chuckled softly. "Or maybe a writer? Imagine the stories you could tell." Melissa glared at him. "Stay away from me." He took a step back, smiling. "We'll see. You might find it's harder to escape your past than you think." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Melissa standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone knew about her past, and they were watching. Chapter 2. The Intruder. "If that stalker thinks he can scare me, he's in for a rude awakening," Melissa thought as she entered the elevator. Her apartment was on the 12th floor, a beautiful space with a breathtaking view of the city skyline. It wasn't cheap, and she had to work 2 shifts to cover the rent. But the luxury she was accustomed to from her past life hadn't completely left her. She twisted the key in the lock and felt a cold breeze brush against her face as she opened the door. "Ghost," she muttered. "No way that creep could have gotten in here." Flicking on the lights, she scanned the room. Everything seemed just as she'd left it. "Maybe I'm just exhausted," she told herself. She tossed her coat on the couch and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water, maybe a splash of wine. That's when she saw it, a locket lying on the counter. An antique piece, intricately designed with a small keyhole. Melissa froze, her eyes darting around the room for any signs of life. Everything was still. "Shit," she muttered. If this guy could get into her apartment, he was clearly more dangerous than she'd thought. "You're full of surprises," she said aloud, examining the locket before placing it back on the counter. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. "What the fuck?" Breath hitched. This was all planned. Despite the darkness, she saw shadows shifting. She wasn't alone. Moving silently, she reached for the 3rd drawer where she kept her gun, along with a silencer and 3 bullets. But when she opened it, the drawer was empty. Blood ran cold. "Looking for this?" A deep, raspy voice whispered in her ear as the cold barrel of a gun pressed against the back of her head. She could feel his presence, warm and unsettling, just inches behind her. "Stupid Melissa," he thought. Of course, he'd find the gun if he got in here. She raised her hands in surrender. The man let out a low, mocking laugh. "What's the matter? Scared now that I'm actually here?" Melissa smirked. "I wouldn't be so cocky if I were you," she said, twisting the gun out of his hand, elbowing him in the gut and turning to aim the weapon at. But when she saw him, her breath caught in her throat. The man was huge, dressed in a hoodie and mask that concealed most of his face, except for his piercing eyes. Carnal eyes that radiated power and authority. He was more than just a hired thug. He was dangerous. Things were different. She might have even found him attractive. But that wouldn't stop her from pulling the trigger. Take off the mask. I want to see your face. The man smirked. Feisty. Just what I'd expect from the youngest daughter of the Sylvester family. Take it off, Melissa demanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I won't ask again. With one swift move, he disarmed her, spinning her around and pinning her against his chest, her back pressed to him. He was strong, stronger than she'd imagined. Her heart pounded as his grip tightened. He leaned in, taking a deep breath as if inhaling the scent of her hair, sending chills down her spine. I intend to show you more than just my face, sweetheart, whispered. But you'll have to wait. Melissa stomped on his foot, breaking free from his hold. She spun around, aiming a punch at his face, but he dodged, grabbing her wrist midair. Their eyes locked, and she saw a glimmer of amusement in his gaze. Nice try, he said, pulling her closer. But you'll have to do better than that. Who the hell are you? Melissa growled, twisting free and aiming a kick at his knee. Caught her leg and spun her around, pinning her against the wall. Someone who's been watching you for a long time, he whispered in her ear, his breath hot against her skin. Get off me, she yelled, pushing against him, but he was too strong. You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment. His voice low and seductive. What do you want? Melissa demanded, her heart racing. To show you that you're not as safe as you think you are, replied, his hand trailing down her arm, sending shivers through her body. Melissa glared at him, defiance burning in her chest. I'll never trust you. We'll see, he said, his voice a dangerous whisper. In time, you'll realize you need me as much as I need you. With that, he released her, stepping back into the shadows of her apartment. Melissa's knees felt weak as the reality of what had just happened set in. As she stood there, alone in the dark, part of her couldn't help but wonder if he was right. If in some twisted way, he really was the only one who could protect her. The thought sent a chill down her spine, and she knew her life would never be the same again. Chapter 3, Unleashing the Fury. Melissa's chest heaved as she struggled to regain her composure. Fear was still there, cold, nagging sensation in her gut, but something else was taking over now. Anger. Pure, unadulterated rage. He had spent years trying to escape the shadows of her past, but they had found her anyway. And now this man had dared to break into her home to threaten her. Whoever he was, he had just made a fatal mistake. Melissa stood, her hands balling into fists. The locket on the counter caught her eye again. Small keyhole gleaming in the dim light. She grabbed it, cold metal biting into her palm. Whatever this man was after, it had something to do with this locket. But there was no time to ponder its significance. She needed to be ready. She needed to fight. The apartment was eerily quiet now, but she could sense his presence. He was still here, watching her, waiting for her next move. But this time, she wasn't going to wait for him to strike first. Melissa moved silently through the apartment, her senses on high alert. She reached into a hidden compartment beneath her coffee table and retrieved a pair of brass knuckles. Her father had always told her to have more than one line of defense, and she had never forgotten that lesson. The sound of a faint creak reached her ears, coming from the bedroom. Melissa's heart raced as she crept toward the sound, her body tense, ready to strike. She pushed the door open slowly, her knuckles ready to lash out, the first sign of movement. There he was, standing by the window, his back turned to her. He seemed almost relaxed, as if he had all the time in the world. But Melissa wasn't about to let him have the upper hand again. With a burst of speed, she lunged at him, swinging the brass knuckles with deadly precision. He turned just in time, catching her arm mid-swing with a speed that surprised her. But Melissa was ready. She twisted her body, using her momentum to break free from his grip, and aimed a sharp kick at his side. The man grunted as the kick connected, but he recovered quickly, grabbing her leg and pulling her off balance. Melissa hit the floor hard, but she didn't let the pain slow her down. She rolled to her feet, ready to strike again. "You've got some fight in you," he remarked, a smirk playing on his lips as he advanced on her. "I like that." "Shut up." Melissa snarled, launching herself at him again. This time, she feinted left before delivering a powerful right hook to his jaw. The impact sent him stumbling back, and for a moment, she thought she had him. But the man was relentless. He recovered quickly, grabbing her by the shoulders and slamming her against the wall. Melissa's vision blurred from the impact, but she refused to give in. She lashed out with her elbow, aiming for his ribs, and was rewarded with a satisfying groan of pain. They fought viciously, the small bedroom barely containing their struggle. Melissa's breaths came in ragged gasps as she fought to keep him at bay. The man was strong, but she was fueled by something more: survival. Finally, with a well-timed move, she managed to twist his arm behind his back and slam him face first into the wall. She pressed the brass knuckles against his throat, breath hot against his ear. "Who sent you?" Melissa demanded, her voice low and dangerous. "Why are you after me?" The man let out a low, breathless laugh. "You really think I'm going to tell you?" "You don't have a choice," Melissa hissed, pressing harder. "Talk, or I swear I'll—" "Kill me?" he interrupted, a smirk curling his lips even as he struggled to breathe. "Go ahead. That won't stop what's coming for you." Melissa's grip faltered slightly at his words, cold dread creeping into her heart. What did he mean by that? What else was coming for her? Sensing her hesitation, the man twisted free from her grasp and spun around, grabbing her by the wrists. They struggled again, their faces inches apart, their breaths mingling in the tense silence. "I have to admit," he said, his voice a strained whisper, "you're a lot tougher than I expected." "Then you should have known better than to come after me." Melissa shot back, her eyes blazing with defiance. For a moment, they were locked in a tense standoff, their bodies pressed together as they fought for dominance. But then, something shifted in the man's expression. His smirk faded, replaced by a look of grudging respect. "I wasn't lying, you know," he said quietly. "There's more at play here than you realize. You might want to start running again." Melissa narrowed her eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he released her abruptly and stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "You won this round, Melissa. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Before she could react, he turned and jumped out of the window with surprising agility. Melissa ran to the window, watching as he disappeared into the night, his figure swallowed by the shadows. Her heart was pounding in her chest, a mix of adrenaline and confusion. Who was that man? And what did he mean by saying she needed to start running again? She hated the idea of being on the run. Something told her this was just the beginning. Chapter 4. The Twist. The next morning, Melissa woke up with a throbbing headache and bruises covering her arms. The events of the previous night played over in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. She got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, hoping a cup of coffee might help clear her head. As she poured herself a cup, she noticed the locket still lying on the counter. She had completely forgotten about it in the chaos of last night. Picking it up, she examined it more closely. There was something strange about it, something she hadn't noticed before. Keyhole. It was oddly familiar, almost as if she had seen it somewhere before. But where? Suddenly, it hit her. The locket was identical to one her mother used to wear back when she was still alive. A wave of nostalgia washed over her, mixed with a sense of foreboding. Her mother had never let anyone touch that locket, and Melissa had always assumed it was just a piece of sentimental jewelry. But what if it was more than that? Her fingers shook as she tried to open the locket, but it wouldn't budge. There had to be a key, but where? Her mother's old belongings were stored in a box under her bed. Maybe the key was there. She rushed to her bedroom and pulled out the box, rummaging through it until her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. Pulled it out. A small, delicate key. Her heart pounded as she inserted it into the locket's keyhole. With a soft click, the locket opened, revealing a small piece of paper folded inside. Melissa unfolded it, her eyes widening as she read the message scrawled in her mother's handwriting. "Trust no one. They're coming for you. Run." Melissa's blood ran cold. Her mother had known. She had been trying to protect her, even from beyond the grave. But from what? And who was they? A knock at the door made her jump. She grabbed the brass knuckles from the nightstand and approached the door cautiously. She wasn't taking any chances after last night. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "It's Sarah," came the reply, the voice of her best friend. "Open up, Melissa. It's urgent." Melissa hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. Sarah stood there, looking frazzled and out of breath, her eyes wide with panic. "What's going on?" Melissa asked, frowning. "They're here," Sarah gasped, grabbing Melissa's arm. "We need to leave, now." "Who's here?" Melissa demanded, but Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she pulled Melissa toward the door, grip almost painfully tight. "There's no time to explain," Sarah said urgently. "We need to get out of here before." Before she could finish, the front door burst open, and several men in black suits stormed in. Melissa's instincts kicked in, and she lashed out, landing a solid punch on the nearest man's jaw. But there were too many of them. Sarah screamed as one of the men grabbed her, pulling her back. Melissa fought with everything she had, but it was no use. Within moments, she was overpowered, arms pinned behind her back. "Melissa Sylvester," one of the men said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You're coming with us." "Like hell I am," Melissa spat, struggling against their grip. "You don't have a choice," the man replied, his expression cold. "We know about the locket, and we know what it contains. You're not safe here. You never were." Melissa's mind raced. Was this what the man from last night had been talking about? Was this why her mother had warned her to run? As they dragged her toward the door, Sarah's panicked voice rang in her ears. Enjoying the drama? Subscribe and hit the bell. Our next chapter is about to get even better, and things are just heating up. Chapter 5, The Escape. Melissa struggled, her mind whirling with a mix of fear and anger. The grip of the men was firm, but she refused to go down without a fight. Her thoughts kept circling back to the locket and the ominous message from her mother. Whatever was happening, it was clear that she was in far deeper trouble than she had ever imagined. As they dragged her toward the door, Sarah's voice suddenly rang out, desperate and determined. "Wait!" Sarah cried, her voice cracking with panic. "You don't understand. You're making a huge mistake." The man holding Melissa paused, narrowing his eyes at Sarah. "What are you talking about?" he asked sharp. Sarah swallowed hard, her gaze flickering to Melissa before she continued. "She's not the one you're looking for. You've got the wrong person." Melissa's heart skipped a beat. What was Sarah doing? But she couldn't say anything, couldn't protest, because any sudden movement might make the situation worse. She watched as Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes full of some unspoken plan. "I'm Melissa Sylvester," Sarah said boldly, stepping forward. "She's just a friend who got caught up in this by mistake." Melissa's eyes widened in shock. "Sarah, what are you?" "Shut up!" Sarah hissed at her, cutting her off with a sharp look. "You've done enough, okay? Let me handle this." The man seemed to hesitate, studying Sarah intently. Melissa could see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to determine whether Sarah was telling the truth. But before he could say anything, another voice, cold and authoritative, spoke from behind them. "She's lying." Everyone turned to see a tall figure standing in the doorway, his presence commanding and dangerous. It was the man from the previous night, the one who had warned Melissa to run. His face was bruised from their fight, but his eyes were sharp, filled with a dangerous intensity. "The real Melissa Sylvester is standing right there," he said, pointing at Melissa, "and I'm not letting you take her." The room tensed as the men in black shifted, their grip on Melissa tightening. The man who had just spoken stepped forward, his eyes locked on Melissa. "You need to come with me," he said firmly, ignoring the protests of the men holding her. Now, Melissa was torn. On one hand, this man had invaded her home, fought her, and threatened her. But on the other hand, he seemed to know more about what was going on than anyone else. And there was something in his voice, an urgency that made her think he might actually be trying to help. Before she could make a decision, the man from the night before acted. In a blur of movement, he lunged at the men holding her, throwing a powerful punch that sent one of them reeling. The room erupted into chaos as a full-blown fight broke out. Sarah screamed and ducked behind the couch, while Melissa found herself in the middle of the fray. The man from the night before was fighting off the other men with brutal efficiency, his movements swift and calculated. Melissa, still dazed from the shock of everything, managed to slip out of the grip of the man holding her and staggered back. "Get out of here now!" the man shouted at her, dodging a blow aimed at his head. "Run!" Melissa hesitated for only a second before she turned and bolted for the door. She wasn't sure where she was going or what she was going to do, but one thing was certain: staying here wasn't an option. As she ran out into the hallway, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She glanced back to see Sarah following close behind, face pale with fear. "Come on, let's go," Sarah urged, grabbing Melissa's hand and pulling her toward the stairwell. They raced down the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the empty building. Melissa's heart was pounding, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who were those men? Why were they after her? And why had Sarah claimed to be her? As they reached the ground floor, Melissa skidded to a stop, breath coming in ragged gasps. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? Why did you say you were me?" Sarah looked at her, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. "I'm sorry, Melissa. I panicked. I thought if I could buy you some time, you might be able to escape." "But why would you do that?" Melissa demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "You could have gotten yourself killed." "Because I care about you." Sarah snapped, tears welling in her eyes. "You're my best friend, Melissa. I couldn't just stand there and let them take you. I was trying to protect you." Melissa felt a lump form in her throat. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah had put herself in danger to save her. It was a risky, reckless move, but it was also one born out of loyalty and friendship. "Sarah?" Melissa began, but before she could finish, the door to the stairwell burst open, and the man from the night before appeared, breathing heavily. "We need to keep moving," he said urgently, glancing over his shoulder. "They won't stop until they have you. We have to get out of the city." "Who are you?" Melissa demanded, her eyes narrowing. "And why should we trust you?" "There's no time for explanation," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But if you want to stay alive, you'll come with me." Melissa hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run in the opposite direction. But she knew that staying here wasn't an option. And despite everything, a part of her believed that this man might actually be trying to help her. "Fine," she said finally, grabbing Sarah's hand. "But if you try anything, I swear I'll—" "David," the man interrupted, already moving toward the exit. "Let's go." Melissa and Sarah followed him out of the building and into the night. The city streets were eerily quiet, a distant hum of traffic, the only sound. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as they made their way to a parked car. The man unlocked the car and motioned for them to get in. Melissa slid into the passenger seat, while Sarah climbed into the back. The man got behind the wheel and started the engine, pulling away from the curb with a sense of urgency. For a few moments they drove in silence, the tension in the car thick and suffocating. Finally, Melissa couldn't take it anymore. "Are you gonna tell me what's going on?" she demanded, her voice tight with frustration. "Who are you? And why are those men after me?" The man glanced at her briefly before turning his attention back to the road. "My name is Jake," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "I was sent to protect you." "Protect me?" Melissa repeated incredulously. "You broke into my apartment and attacked me." "Because you weren't supposed to be there," Jake replied, voice calm. "I was trying to secure the place before they found you." "Who are they?" Sarah asked from the back seat, voice trembling. "Why are they after Melissa?" Jake's expression hardened. "They're part of an organization that's been hunting your family for years, Melissa. They want what's inside that locket, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it." Melissa's blood ran cold. The locket, the same one her mother had warned her of. This whole time she had thought it was just a piece of jewelry. But it was so much more than that. "What's inside the locket?" Melissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake hesitated, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "It's a key," he said finally. "A key to something that could change everything. That's why they want it so badly." "A key to what?" Melissa pressed. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But whatever it is, it's something powerful, something dangerous." Melissa leaned back in her seat, her mind spinning. Key? What could her mother have possibly been involved in that would lead to something like this? As they drove through the city, Melissa realized that her life was never going to be the same. She had been thrust into a world of secrets and danger, and there was no going back. The only thing she could do now was trust Jake and hope that he was telling the truth. But as they crossed the bridge out of the city, thoughts struck her, sending a chill down her spine. This was just the beginning. What else was waiting for her on the other side? Melissa's head was spinning, the weight of Jake's revelation pressing down on her. A safe house, a secret key, a mysterious organization hunting her. It was all too much to process. She barely noticed the passing scenery as they drove, her mind tangled in a web of fear and confusion. "Jake?" she said after a long silence, her voice tinged with both uncertainty and a strange sense of familiarity. "Have we met before?" Jake stiffened slightly but kept his eyes on the road. "Not exactly," he replied cryptically, "but I knew you once, a long time ago." Melissa frowned, a flicker of recognition tugging at the edges of her memory. There was something about his voice, his presence, which felt oddly familiar, like a distant memory she couldn't quite grasp. But before she could press further, the car jerked sharply to the left, pulling onto a narrow, winding road, disappeared into the woods. "We're almost there," Jake said, his tone back to being businesslike. But Melissa noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. The trees loomed overhead, their branches casting eerie shadows across the road as they drove deeper into the forest. After a few more minutes, they arrived at a secluded cabin, hidden away from the world. Jake parked the car and turned off the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening. "Let's go," he said, opening the door and stepping out into the cool night air. Melissa and Sarah followed, the gravel crunching under their feet as they approached the cabin. Inside, the cabin was simple but cozy, with rustic wooden furniture and a fireplace that crackled softly in the corner. Jake quickly checked the perimeter, securing the doors and windows before turning to face the two women. "We should be safe here," he said, his voice low, "at least for now." Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her face pale with exhaustion. "Safe? How long are we supposed to stay here?" "As long as it takes," Jake replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Until we figure out what's going on and how to stop it." Melissa's eyes remained fixed on Jake, her heart beating a little faster as she tried to piece together the puzzle. There was something more to him, something that was nagging at the back of her mind. "Jake," she said softly, stepping closer to him, You said you knew me once. What did you mean by that? Jake's expression softened, and for the first time since she had met him, Melissa saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something he had been holding back for a long time. You remember your childhood, Melissa? He asked gently. When you used to visit your grandmother's house every summer? Melissa blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in the conversation. Of course, she said slowly. I loved those summers. But what does that have to do with? There was a boy who lived next door. Jake interrupted, voice quiet. You two were inseparable. You spent every day together, playing in the woods, building forts, pretending to be adventurers on a grand quest. You called him your knight in shining armor. Melissa's breath caught in her throat as the memories came flooding back. She remembered those summers vividly. The joy, the laughter, the endless days of playing outside until the sun set. And she remembered the boy, her best friend, partner in crime. They had promised to be friends forever, but one summer, he had suddenly disappeared, and she had never seen him again. Jake? She whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Jake nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and sadness. It's me, Melissa. I'm that boy. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Melissa stared at Jake, her mind struggling to reconcile the man standing in front of her with the boy she had once known. The same boy she had thought about so often over the years, wondering where he had gone, why he had left without a word. You left, she said, her voice barely audible. You disappeared, and I never knew why. Jake's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his face. My family had to leave suddenly, he explained. There were complications. I wanted to tell you, but there wasn't time. I never stopped thinking about you, Melissa. And when I found out you were in danger, I knew I had to protect you. Melissa's heart ached with a mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, and something else she couldn't quite define. She had spent years wondering about him, missing him, and now here he was, standing right in front of her. Why didn't you come back? She asked, her voice laced with a hint of hurt. Jake stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her. I couldn't, he said softly. I was pulled into a life I never wanted, forced to do things I never imagined. But I'm here now, and I swear, Melissa, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Melissa felt a tear slip down her cheek as the weight of his words sank in. Despite the years and the distance, the connection between them was still there, strong and unbroken. And in that moment, she realized that the boy she had once loved had grown into the man standing before her. The man who had risked everything to protect her. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers brushing against the stubble on his jaw. Jake's breath hitched at the contact, and before she could second-guess herself, Melissa leaned in, closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, as if they were both testing the waters. But then it deepened, a surge of emotion washing over them as the years of separation melted away. Jake's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer as he kissed her with a desperation that spoke of all the lost time, all the unspoken feelings. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other's. Melissa's heart was racing, her mind a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing was crystal clear. She had found her way back to Jake, and she wasn't gonna let him go again. I missed you, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Jake smiled, his eyes softening as he looked at her. I missed you too, Melissa. More than you'll ever know. And for the first time in a long time, Melissa felt a sense of peace, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just like they always had.